I think my own personal relationship with this muscle is that it's extraordinary, and that, especially if you look at it as coming from T12, it actually interdigitates. I was looking for a good picture, and there is one in here, I just couldn't find it, where it shows the diaphragm. So the diaphragm, the engine of the breath, the muscle that drives the breath, is actually here, just on the inside of the rib cage, all the way around, wraps all the way around, and is essentially a horizontal muscle that has a dome shape and does this in order to generate breath, right? To invite the air in and then to expel it. So right where that happens, the diaphragm has two legs that come down, and they actually transition down into the upper lumbar spine. So we have the diaphragm coming across, the two legs of the diaphragm, and then the psoas coming up from, the center of the body, and they essentially pass each other. So there we have the intersection with the breath, very dynamic, important part of the body. Also a very important part neurologically. There are a lot of nerve sensors, both sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves in through this part of the body, and then above and below. So then the psoas major is passing, it's attaching onto the lumbar spine and deep to the whole abdominal visceral cavity. So here we have what's sometimes called the second brain of the body, one of the most important parts that affects so much of who we are. That the psoas is deep to that as well. It's also affecting the really critical part, the most load-bearing part of the spine. Then it passes in front of the sacrum, even the SI joint, then in front of the hip joint, and then attaches onto the lower extremity. So it involves these critical sections of the body that are involved in so much of who we are and in all that we do, whether it's actual movement, locomotive movement, or it's stabilization as we move, but also things in terms of the life of the viscera and all that that means, the life of the breath, the life of our pelvis. Really interesting and important to notice that when you bend the knees, see how well I can control our friend here. When you bend the knees, the psoas is relatively short or relaxed. It doesn't have to work so hard, right? So when you straighten the legs, as we do to self-regulate, to stop, to take a break, when you straighten the legs, we actually bring more length into the psoas. And here, where it crosses down and attaches onto the trochanter, let's see if I truly have the leg straight. Into this one. It actually arcs a little bit across the bone at the bottom of the pelvis. So it actually brings it into some pretty good tension there. So by straightening, you're giving tension back to the psoas, and the shaking will, there might be residual, but typically the shaking will resolve with that. Similarly, when we bend the knees, as in the final progression when we're on the floor, when we bend the knees, and I'll point out, because interestingly, Chris was asking me about this, and I was looking in one of my books last night before he mentioned this, and they were showing that one of the ways to actually feel the psoas, to contract the psoas, is actually this very position, and just by pressing the feet together, the soles of the feet together. But they also point out you don't want the feet in too close, right? And that's been, I'd say, a more and more current theme in the TRE world, is to make sure not to bring the heels in too close to the pelvis. And I think what that's really about is that when you bring them in too close, suddenly it actually creates more activation on these big muscles of the inner thighs. When you take the feet further away, they're not as active, so that when we go to lift the pelvis, the primary thing, the overwhelming thing that's actually activated here is the psoas, and largely, not completely by itself, but much more isolatedly than it would be if we had the feet in close and we're pushing up. If we draw the feet away, then the psoas really is working. So there we're really activating it before we lower the pelvis and bring it back down. Okay. So it's a really phenomenal, extraordinary set of muscles.